Ever get that feeling like when you're looking at some really tough problem and you almost need like totally different sets of tools to even get a grip on it?
Yeah. Yeah, like trying to make sense of it
It's
all.
like, how can something like the logic of a science experiment even relate to like how a work of art makes you feel?
Right.
Like, are all these different ways of knowing things totally separate,
Mm.
or is there some kind of like hidden connection between them?
Hmm.
It's actually that question that kind of pulled me into the world of this guy, Boethius of Dacia.
Okay.
Pretty sharp thinker back in 13th century Paris.
Wow, 13th century
Yeah.
Paris.
And get this, Boethius was living right smack in the middle of this like super intense debate about reason and religious beliefs.
Uh-huh.
It was like everyone was trying to work out how these different ways of understanding the world could even exist together.
Right, right.
Almost like they were trying to come up with like the rule book for different intellectual games.
I like that. Rule books for different intellectual games.
Yeah, so in this deep dive, we're going all the way back to the 1270s,
All right.
Paris, right into the mind of this master of arts, Boethius of Dacia. And, you, our listener, you shared some absolutely amazing material with us on philosophical inquiry.
Fantastic stuff.
And what really hooked us was how Boethius approached the whole act of like doing philosophy, especially when different ideas seem to clash.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's important to remember here that for Boethius, this wasn't just some kind of abstract theory.
Right.
The guy was an active member of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Paris.
Huge intellectual hub.
Absolutely. A real hotbed of ideas. And, he was even caught up in that famous condemnation of 1277.
Oh, wow.
You can think of it like this massive academic controversy that had real consequences for thinkers back then.
Real high stakes.
Absolutely. So his ideas weren't just like, floating in a vacuum. They were shaped by the world around him.
Okay, so our mission today is to kind of unpack Boethius's key insights on a few things. First, how different areas of knowledge can have their own kind of independence, how they operate on their own. Then, the methods he used to explore those philosophical questions, almost like intellectual sparring, you can say.
I like that. Intellectual sparring.
And then finally, his perspective on the sometimes tricky relationship between reason and faith.
Okay.
What we're going to find out is that Boethius's approach actually offers some surprisingly relevant ways for us to think about dealing with the massive amount of information and different points of view that we face every day.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's start with one of the core principles of Boethius's thinking, this idea of the autonomy of knowledge.
Okay.
His argument, and it's a pretty powerful one, is that each separate area of study, each discipline, has its own set of basic principles.
Oh.
Whether we're talking about natural science or the principles of ethics, or even something like the structure of language and grammar, they all have their own rules of the game, you could say.
Each one's got its own rule book.
Exactly. And Boethius believed that any claims you make within one of these fields, you should judge them only based on those specific principles.
So judge them on their own terms, basically.
Exactly. And he put it so clearly when he said, and I'm quoting here, "No specialist, artifacts in the Latin, can grant or deny anything except on the basis of the principles of his own science."
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Like, what would that look like in a real-world example?
Okay, let's imagine we have a grammarian, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's an expert in the rules of language.
Word nerd.
Basically. Their expertise is all about how sentences are put together, the different forms words can take, all that stuff.
Right.
Their main concern isn't really the real-world meanings of those words.
Mm-hmm.
Boethius used a great example to illustrate this with the word donkey.
Okay. A donkey.
Right. A grammarian would look at donkey and see a noun, a grammatical building block within a sentence.
Right. Part of speech.
Exactly. Now, whether that noun refers to that four-legged braying animal out in the field, that's the zoologist's problem.
Right. Different department.
The grammarian, if they're acting strictly as a grammarian, they stick to the linguistic rules, the grammar.
So it's kind of like having those separate rule books for different subjects.
Exactly.
Like you wouldn't use the rules of literary analysis to solve a math equation, would you?
Definitely not. And it's interesting, Boethius was really critical of even some highly respected thinkers like Priscine,
Good Rashid.
because sometimes they would bring in ideas that weren't strictly about grammar when they were talking about grammar.
Right.
Boethius was really adamant about keeping those intellectual territories separate.
Stay in your lane, basically.
Yeah. And here's a key takeaway for you, dear listener.
Yeah.
As you're out there navigating all the information from all these different sources, scientific studies, ethical arguments, news reports, whatever it is, Boethius's idea suggests that you can approach these different viewpoints and understand them on their own terms. You can look at their internal logic, their principles, without feeling like you have to immediately force them all to fit into one big, perfectly consistent worldview.
Right.
It's about understanding the rules each field is playing by.
Each game has its own set of rules.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about another really important part of how Boethius approached knowledge. These things called disputations. What were those all about?
Well, back in Boethius's time, disputations were like the main event in intellectual circles, especially at universities.
The main attraction.
They were structured debates, sometimes super formal with set roles for each participant.
Okay.
And in these debates, people would present different arguments for and against a specific idea.
Right.
And then, of course, they'd defend those arguments. It was a really dynamic and interactive way of getting to the bottom of things.
So it wasn't just about sitting there passively absorbing information.
Right.
It was about actively engaging with different ideas, almost battling it out.
Absolutely. It was an intellectual wrestling match.
I like that, wrestling match.
Yeah.
So how did Boethius connect this practice to the way knowledge actually develops?
Well, his whole view of what it meant to do science, to investigate the world, was really reflected in this back and forth, this grant or deny dynamic of a disputation.
Right.
Someone would put forward a statement, kind of like a hypothesis we'd say today,
Okay.
and then everyone else had to either agree with it or shoot it down.
Oh, based on what?
Based on those established principles of that specific field of knowledge.
Ah, so using the rule book of that particular game.
Precisely. So for Boethius, truth within a certain discipline wasn't some abstract concept. It was bound up in this process of rigorous questioning and answering, all happening within those agreed upon rules of that discipline.
Okay, you mentioned an example from physics earlier.
Right. But let's take this idea of a first movement, a movement that's not caused by any earlier movement.
Right.
Now, within the framework of Aristotelian physics, which was super influential at the time, this idea hits a snag.
Runs into a wall.
Because physics, as Boethius understood it, operated on this principle that every movement has a cause, something that came before it.
Okay.
So within the science of physics, this concept of a first movement would have to be rejected.
Out of bounds.
Exactly, because it breaks a fundamental rule of that field.
So it sounds like a very systematic, really rigorous way of thinking.
It was all about logic and consistency. And, Boethius even talked about something called the ars obligatoria, which gives us even more insight into his methodical approach to philosophical inquiry.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It was a specific kind of exercise they did in these disputations. Two main parts to it.
Okay.
First, the person responding to the arguments had to accept a bunch of statements.
Okay.
It didn't matter if they actually believed them or not.
Interesting.
They could only reject a statement if it directly contradicted something they'd already agreed to.
Okay.
Then, in the second part, they introduced new statements. But this time, the person responding could only agree with what logically followed from that first set of statements they'd accepted.
So they were kind of trapped by their initial agreements.
In a way, yes. It forced them to think through the consequences of those initial ideas to see where the logic led.
That's fascinating. It's like building a logical structure piece by piece and then seeing if it can actually stand up.
It's exactly that. It mirrors how we establish those fundamental principles, those axioms, in any science.
Right, the starting point.
And then rigorously test what conclusions can be drawn from them.
Stay within the lines.
Exactly. Follow the thread of logic wherever it leads, but always within the boundaries of that specific system.
Now, we can't talk about the intellectual scene in the 13th century without bringing up this big question, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole relationship between philosophy and religious faith. How did Boethius approach that, especially given how complex and, let's be honest, often controversial it was?
Yeah, that was a major issue in Boethius's day, trying to figure out how the knowledge gained through philosophy, specifically Aristotelian philosophy, which was making a big comeback, how all that fit with the teachings of Christian theology.
Right, two big systems of thought.
And Boethius's position was pretty clear-cut. He said, fides non est scientia, which means faith is not knowledge, or faith is not science.
Straight to the point.
His argument was that a complete rational understanding of the divine, of the ultimate first cause, that's just beyond the capacity of human reason.
We can't think our way to God, basically.
In a nutshell, yeah. He believed that the very essence of this first cause is just fundamentally mysterious to us, to our logic and our observation.
It's beyond our grasp.
He even pointed to specific theological beliefs that can't be proven through reason alone.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about the idea of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing.
Right.
Or the concept of the first human being coming into existence without being born in the usual way. Or the resurrection of the body. These are all core beliefs in Christianity, but they don't exactly fit neatly into the explanations we use in natural science.
So they don't follow the rules of that game.
Exactly. And this brings us back to Boethius's idea of the autonomy of knowledge, right? These religious ideas, they just don't belong within the realm of natural science.
Different domains.
Precisely. Natural science operates according to its own set of principles, its own methods.
So he's drawing a pretty firm line between these two ways of understanding the world. But does that mean he thought scientists couldn't be religious?
No, not at all. It's really important to understand that this separation didn't mean Boethius thought you couldn't be a scientist and a devout believer at the same time. His framework allowed for both. A scientist could accept these revealed truths of faith as what he called brute facts.
Brute facts.
Basically, beliefs that are accepted as true without needing scientific proof.
Okay.
Kind of like those starting rules we talked about, those axioms. Ah, the foundation of the game.
Exactly. So for the believer, the truths of faith are absolute, unconditional,
Unwavering.
whereas scientific truths are always conditional. They only hold true within that specific system of knowledge with its assumptions and its methods.
So different kinds of truths working in different spheres.
Exactly.
And that feels pretty relevant to some of the debates we're still having today.
You're absolutely right. Boethius gives us his historical framework for how we can hold different kinds of beliefs, accept different types of information without one necessarily canceling out the other.
Makes sense.
It's about recognizing the different foundations on which those beliefs are built.
Yeah.
Now, I know some people have labeled Boethius an Averroist or a radical Aristotelian. What do you make of those labels?
Yeah, I've seen those too. Are they accurate?
Well, most scholars today would say the Averroist label doesn't really fit.
Okay.
Boethius definitely engaged with Averroes' writings, this really influential Islamic philosopher.
Like many thinkers of his time. But there's no real evidence that he saw Averroes as some kind of ultimate authority above everyone else.
Right.
And crucially, Boethius doesn't seem to have bought into this idea of a single universal intellect shared by all humans, which was a key part of Averroes' philosophy. He also had different ideas about how to interpret dreams.
So maybe radical Aristotelian is a better fit.
Even that label needs a bit of unpacking.
Okay.
You see, that label often suggests a contrast with thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, as if there's this orthodox way to understand Aristotle and then a more heterodox way.
The right way and the wrong way.
And that judgment is often coming from a theological standpoint. Boethius was definitely a big fan of Aristotle's thought, but as was pretty common in the 13th century, his understanding of Aristotle was shaped by ideas from other philosophical traditions as well.
Makes sense.
Thinkers like Avicenna, or the ideas in that Neoplatonic text called the Liber de Causes.
So a bit of a mix and match approach.
Yeah, you could say that. But what really makes Boethius stand out is his independent thinking.
He wasn't just following the crowd.
Exactly. He wasn't afraid to come up with his own interpretations, his own arguments. With a few minor exceptions, like maybe a bit of influence from Albert the Great in one particular area, he wasn't overly reliant on other big names of his time.
So he was really carving out his own intellectual path.
Absolutely. He was grappling with all these different philosophical ideas, but forging his own way through them.
Before we wrap up, we should touch on Boethius's thoughts on what he called the supreme good, this idea of the ultimate goal of human life.
Oh, yeah, the point.
He lays it all out in his treatise, De Sumo Bono. What's the gist of it?
Well, in De Sumo Bono, Boethius makes a pretty compelling case that the best, the most fulfilling life a human being can live is the life of a philosopher.
Someone dedicated to seeking knowledge, to pursuing truth.
Exactly.
So how did he define this supreme good?
His definition is beautifully simple: knowing the true, doing the good, and taking delight in both.
Okay, I like that.
For Boethius, a philosopher, by focusing on understanding truth through rigorous intellectual work, naturally becomes a morally good person.
So knowledge leads to virtue, in a way.
That's the idea. He believed that understanding what's right and wrong comes through this pursuit of knowledge. And he also argued that when you're truly engaged in deep thought, In contemplation, it leaves less room for those baser desires.
You're too busy pondering the universe to get into trouble.
Something like that. Plus, he argued that unlike other pursuits, seeking knowledge has no limit. It's something we can always strive for more of.
Always more to learn. It's interesting how he ties intellectual life so closely to ethical behavior. It's not always an obvious connection for everyone.
You're right, and that particular argument has sparked a lot of discussion over the centuries. While he builds on Aristotle's idea that our ultimate good lies in developing our unique human capacity, our reason, Boethius's explanation of how that intellectual life leads to virtue is a bit different from Aristotle's emphasis on cultivating habits and practical wisdom in everyday life.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Boethius of Dacia, what are some of the key takeaways we can carry with us?
Well, the core themes running through Boethius's work are the importance of recognizing those distinct boundaries between different fields of knowledge and respecting their internal principles.
Right.
He was all about using rigorous methods like disputation to really get to the truth of things.
Okay.
And he emphasized the need for logical consistency within each specific area of knowledge. He also provided us with a framework for understanding the relationship between reason and faith, not as two forces that are always at odds with each other,
Right.
but as two distinct ways of engaging with the world, each with its own set of truths that can potentially coexist.
It's that focus on respecting boundaries that I find really thought-provoking.
Yeah, I agree.
In a world where we're constantly bombarded with information from every direction, all these different sources claiming they have the answer, Boethius gives us this historical lens for navigating all that complexity.
Absolutely.
He suggests that we can try to understand different viewpoints on their own terms, appreciate the logic within each one,
Yeah.
without feeling like we have to force them all to fit into one grand, unified theory of everything.
Right.
It's like he's saying, hey, this idea makes sense within this particular system, within these rules, and that's a really valuable skill to have in today's world.
Absolutely. That's a major aha moment. His framework really highlights the importance of understanding those basic rules of the game, the core assumptions, and the accepted methods of inquiry within each area of knowledge. That's key to making sense of all this complex information and all those different viewpoints we encounter. And it's incredibly relevant to the challenges you, our listener, face in trying to understand the world around you.
So for you, as you continue learning and researching, Boethius's approach can be a really useful tool. It encourages you to appreciate different perspectives for what they are within their own contexts, which can lead to a much richer and more nuanced understanding of whatever you're exploring.
Exactly. And it raises this crucial question for you to ponder. In our modern world, which is overflowing with information from countless experts, each with their own little corner of knowledge and often presenting seemingly conflicting findings,
Right.
how can Boethius's principle of the autonomy of knowledge help us become more informed, more discerning thinkers?
Great question.
Take a moment to reflect on how you currently process information from all these different sources. Does his framework offer a new way for you to approach and evaluate the various claims being made?
Food for thought.
Yeah.
It's definitely something to keep in mind, even after our deep dive is over. Exploring the ideas of someone like Boethius of Dacia reminds us that these fundamental questions about knowledge, about understanding, about truth, they've been with us for centuries. And engaging with these historical perspectives can offer some really profound insights into the challenges of our own modern world.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.